Rain lashes a broken barn as torches rise outside. Inside, a woman, her face half-burned, whispers, "Don't look at me, I'm ruined." But the man at the door doesn't flinch. Blood on his knuckles, collar undone, he steps through the storm and says, "So am I." They say she cursed a judge. They say he betrayed his oath. But what if the real curse was silence and the crime was compassion? When justice becomes fear and mercy becomes treason, what would you do? Rain cracked against the tin roof like a war drum, steady and unrelenting. Thunder growled in the distance, low and guttural, echoing through the hollow of the valley. The barn stood half-collapsed under the weight of storm and memory, its splintered beams sagging like tired shoulders. Every gust of wind stoked the hanging lanterns outside, their flames whipping sideways, casting tall, jittering shadows that danced across the ruined field. Before we unveil why a man with blood on his hands chose to kneel instead of draw, why a town built on silence nearly tore itself apart, and what mark a carved wooden bird left in a child's trembling hand, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just tales from the edge of firelight, they're oaths, broken and remade in the dark. Your support keeps the gun holstered, the truth spoken, and the trail lit for the next soul standing alone. One click means one more reckoning finds its voice. Thank you for riding with us. Men moved in the dark, torches in hand, voices raised not in chaos but in purpose. They were coming. Inside, Mira crouched behind a rotted beam, her breath shallow, clinging to silence like it was the last holy thing in the world. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, soaked through, streaked with mud and ash. Blood had dried against her neck in a jagged line, cracked now from the cold. Half her face was mottled, red and raw flesh kissed too long by flame. Skin that once drew glances now drew only judgment. She didn't cry. She hadn't for hours. Her strength now was the stillness. The resolve that came after the scream had nowhere else to go. A footstep landed just beyond the barn doors, heavy, deliberate. Then another. The creak of hinges gave way to a figure stepping through the rain like it owed him something. His coat flared with each gust, soaked black. Collar undone. Shirt stained with blood that wasn't just his. He paused only once, long enough for the silence to thicken. She didn't look at him, didn't need to. Her voice was barely air. "Don't look at me," she whispered. "I'm ruined." He stood motionless at first, just a breath inside the threshold. Rain dripped from his hair, clung to his brow. There was a split above his temple, opened by a rifle stock, still bleeding sluggishly. His hands were raw at the knuckles, fingers curled like they'd forgotten peace. When he finally moved, it wasn't slow, it was absolute. No hesitation, no pity. He stepped into the barn like a man entering confession. "So am I," he said. Lightning flared. In that white flash, his silhouette sharpened torn coat, pistol holster empty, eyes darker than the storm behind him. He didn't flinch at her wounds. He didn't recoil like the others. He came closer, boots muffled by straw, until the space between them was barely the length of a breath. Outside, the shouts grew louder. "Marshal, we know she's in there." A voice cracked through the rain. "Step aside or burn with her." He didn't look back. His voice dropped lower, only for her. "They won't wait long." She trembled, not from fear, but from the ache of being seen. His eyes didn't ask for her past. They didn't beg for a version of her that no longer existed. They only held ground. And in that, something fragile flared behind her ribs, something like defiance, or maybe mercy. "They think I hexed a judge," she murmured. "They think I cursed the fire." He tilted his head, the edge of a grim smile playing at his mouth. "Good, let them think." Another voice outside. "Last chance, Marshal." He reached into his coat and pulled free a small token, a child's toy, hand-carved, burned at the edges, but intact. He pressed it into her palm without a word. Then he turned toward the door. And waited. The sun poured down like judgment. No breeze, no shade, just heat and dust and the stench of old blood baking into cracked earth. The horse moved slow, each hoof sinking into the parched dirt with a tired thud. Rhys Delane rode like a man with no destination left, only gravity and grit pulling him forward. His coat, once regulation black, was sun-faded to the color of gunmetal. He hadn't shaved in days. His badge hung loose, scratched but still visible just enough to warn, not enough to promise protection. Hollow Rock was barely a town anymore. Half its buildings had been converted to barracks or holding cells. The church doors were chained shut. The saloon flew the council's white banner like a threat. Children didn't run in the street. Dogs didn't bark. And from the looks of the closed shutters and the wary eyes behind them, something had gone quiet in all the wrong ways. He didn't announce himself. Didn't need to. They'd see the horse, the badge, the face that had once belonged to justice. Most here remembered him. That used to count for something. The first sound he noticed wasn't a voice. It was buzzing flies. They circled thick near the edge of town, where a wooden post stood crooked in the heat. From a distance, it looked like a scarecrow. Closer, it was a woman. Arms bound above her head, skin raw where the rope had bit in. Her lips were split, one eye swollen shut. She wore no sign of rank or crime, only a crude brand scrawled in charcoal on her shoulder, a jagged spiral. The mark of the accused. He dismounted slowly. No one came to stop him. No one came to help. Who did this? He asked no one in particular. A voice from a stoop muttered, "Council decree." Heretic. He stepped toward her anyway. Mira stirred as the shadow fell across her. She blinked once, slow. Didn't flinch. "They'll call you traitor," she rasped. Her voice had sand in it. "I've been called worse," he said. The knot was thick and cruel. Took him longer than expected to cut it. His blade slipped once, nicking his thumb. Blood mixed with sweat ran down the hilt. When the rope finally fell, she collapsed. He caught her, barely. "Why?" she asked, barely audible. "Because you're not a scarecrow," he muttered. He lifted her, one arm under her knees, the other steadying her back. She was light, too light, bones and bruises. Her head lolled against his shoulder. A few onlookers watched from behind curtains. No one opened a door. He carried her past the saloon, past the chained church, past the old well where the town used to gather. No one spoke, no one dared. At the old livery barn, he kicked the door in. It hadn't housed horses in years. He laid her down on a pile of dried hay and set his coat over her. Then he stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and waited for the consequences. They didn't take long. By sundown, word had reached the barracks. By nightfall, the bounty was posted. Marshal Rhys Delane, complicit in harboring witchblood. He'd made his choice. And Hollow Rock was already beginning to tighten its noose. The wind came first, a dry, sighing thing that slithered through hollow eaves and stirred up loose dust. Hollow Rock always felt brittle, but now it sounded it too. Window shutters banged like nervous ticks, and dry weeds scratched against the wooden bones of the town as though they were trying to claw their way out. Inside the barn, Mira slept in broken snatches, never fully still, as if some part of her remained lashed to that post at the town's edge. Rhys watched over her from the threshold, hand resting near his sidearm, eyes sharper than they had been in years. He didn't light a fire, not just because it was warm, but because fire, now, meant something else. By mid-morning, the whispers had begun to circle like buzzards. One boy had seen Rhys carrying Mira. Another swore he heard her speak in tongues before passing out. The blacksmith said her eyes flashed silver in the dark. By noon, the tale had reached the saloon. That Marshal Delane had taken the cursed woman into his care. By sundown, it was more than whispers. The council judge's house went up in flames that very night. A single column of smoke rose over the southern edge of town, black and thin, like a warning finger pointed skyward. Rhys stood in the barn door, watching. He didn't ask if it was her. He didn't need to. She hadn't moved since morning. And yet, by midnight, the story had already taken shape, solid and dangerous. She hexed him, someone muttered in the stables. He spat blood before the blaze, said another. The marshal's been touched, whispered a woman to her daughter. He's not who he was. The town shifted beneath its own skin. The line between law and fear, always fragile, began to fray. Patrols doubled. Riders circled the barn at night, not close enough to confront, just close enough to remind. Old friends crossed the street when they saw Rhys. One man, a former deputy, came by with 2 canteens and left them without a word. His eyes never met Rhys's. At the chapel, where the doors remained chained, a new message had been painted in red across the wood. No quarter for blasphemy. Inside the barn, Mira stirred. Her voice was dry as stone. I dreamed of fire, she said. Rhys didn't answer. I didn't light it, she added after a while. I know, he said, though it didn't matter anymore. The town wasn't asking for truth. It was asking for a target. The next morning, someone left a dead rabbit at the barn door. Its throat had been slit clean, and its body arranged in a spiral. Mira looked at it with no expression. They want fear, she said softly. They're about to find out what I want. Rhys answered, his jaw clenched hard enough to tremble. But even he could feel it. The space was closing in. The silence between knocks would shorten, and when it broke, it wouldn't come gently. The siege had begun, not with bullets or blades, but with rumor and ritual and rot. Hollow Rock wasn't waiting for permission anymore. It was preparing for judgment. The chain across the barn door was thick, rusted iron meant for livestock, not people. Rhys looped it twice, padlocked it himself. It groaned as it tightened, not from the weight but from what it meant. Inside, Mira didn't protest. She'd seen the change in him. He was quieter now, watching the window more than the wound on his temple, hand never far from the rifle slung by the door. The way he moved, even his breath seemed armored. She's not the danger, he said, more to himself than anyone. But the chain answered back with cold finality. The council's bounty went up that morning. Pinned on the tavern wall beside old wanted posters and faded notices. Black ink, fresh and sharp. 100 gold crowns for the capture of Mira, known heretic and conjurer. Half that for Marshal Rhys Delane, derelict of oath and accomplice. Beneath the names, a council seal burned red into the paper like a brand. Some men chuckled, others just stared. No one tore it down. The next knock on Rhys's door didn't come from a soldier, but from a boy. Sammy stood barely waist-high, red-cheeked and nervous, holding something wrapped in cloth. Rhys opened the door just a crack, enough to see the flicker of something innocent still left in Hollow Rock. I brought this, Sammy mumbled. She told me it's for you. He unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing a small wooden figure, a bird, rough-hewn but lovingly shaped. The wings outstretched, tail curved like it was caught mid-flight. The kind of thing a mother would give a child to keep nightmares away. Rhys took it without a word. She said it kept me safe, Sammy whispered, then looked over his shoulder, nervous. She said it helped me sleep the night the fire came. Behind him, someone called his name, sharp and impatient. He flinched, then ran. Rhys stood in the doorway, the bird warm in his hand, watching the child disappear into the dust. Later, 2 of his former deputies came by, but not to help. They stood across the street, arms folded, guns slung low. One called out, "You think you're holding back the tide, Rhys? You're just drowning slower." Rhys didn't answer. The barn creaked behind him, whispering with each gust of wind. Inside, Mira traced a symbol into the dirt floor with her finger absently, over and over. A spiral, a mark meant to ward off evil, or invite it. She stopped when she caught him watching. "You think the chain will stop them?" she asked. "No," he said. "It's to slow them down." The clouds gathered thick that afternoon, darkening the sky until it looked bruised. Thunder didn't roll so much as throb beneath the earth, distant but rising. The kind of storm that didn't just cleanse, it punished. The first fat drops hit the roof like warning shots. It would get worse before it broke. By dusk, more doors in town were bolted shut, not to keep danger out, but to ensure they weren't caught on the wrong side of whatever came next. Reese could feel it. The town wasn't waiting for orders anymore. It was waiting for blood. The bird sat on the windowsill beside him. He didn't know what it meant, but for the first time in days, he let his hand rest near it instead of his gun. And outside, behind the distant howl of wind and thunder, another sound began to rise, boots gathering. A fuse, slowly winding toward flame. The barn glowed faintly from within, flickering like a breath caught between life and death. Outside, Hollow Rock gathered in force. They came not as a mob, but as something colder. Neighbors turned tribunal. Faces lit by the red-orange smears of torchlight. Every shadow sharpened into judgment. The silence between them was louder than any gunshot, broken only by the slow hiss of wind through dead grass and the nervous shifting of boots on dirt. Reese stood alone in the barnyard, back straight, coat open, hands loose at his sides. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the air crackled, heavy with heat and the smell of creosote. Sweat traced a line down his temple, though he didn't move to wipe it. His gaze swept the crowd, men he'd ridden with, women he'd defended, boys he'd taught to shoot straight. Now their eyes held no memory, only fear and flame. "She's inside," someone called out. The voice cracked but carried. "You've had your chance, Marshal." Another voice, louder, younger. "Let her burn or burn with her." A ripple moved through the crowd, agitation, agreement, something darker. Torches raised higher, illuminating the crude spiral scrawled again in red on the barn wall. Someone had drawn it there in the dark. A warning. Or a promise. Reese didn't blink. "She's not the one who burned the judge's house." "We know," a man spat. "But she cursed it, brought it on him." Reese took one step forward, slow and deliberate. "You're not looking for justice. You're looking for a body to blame." The murmur grew louder. Someone cocked a rifle. Behind him, the barn door creaked open. Mira stepped out, barefoot in the dirt, shoulders bare, the chain left hanging loose behind her. She looked fragile and furious, like a statue carved from scorched earth. The firelight caught the scar across her cheek, painting it gold. "I won't hide," she said, her voice trembling but clear. A woman in the crowd let out a gasp. A child whimpered. Still, no one lowered their torch. Reese drew his revolver. Gasps rose, but instead of raising it, he knelt and placed the weapon on the ground. The metallic clink rang through the stillness like a bell. "I swore to protect what's just," he said. "Not what's popular, not what's safe, just." His voice hardened. "You decide what that means." No one moved. Rain finally broke from the sky in a sudden crash, sizzling on torch heads, steaming on skin. The flames flickered, sputtered, but held. Mira looked to him, eyes wide, breath caught. For the first time, she saw it. He wasn't here to save her. He was here to stand beside her if it came to dying. The crowd stared back uncertain, caught between the story they'd been fed and the truth they feared. Water streaked down faces, washing ash into mud, flame into smoke. One man turned away, then another. A rifle lowered. A torch hit the dirt, hissed out. But others stood firm. And the question now hung in the air like lightning waiting for ground. Would you have walked away, or stood with her? Hoofbeats shattered the standoff. From the southern trail came thunder, not from the sky, but from earth and fury. The crowd turned as one, firelight bouncing off wet faces, eyes squinting into the blur of motion that barreled toward them. Rain streaked sideways, smoke coiling through the mist. And then she emerged. A dark horse, broad-chested and wild-eyed, slid through the mud in a controlled lurch. Its rider didn't falter. She sat tall in the saddle, soaked to the bone, coat flapping like the wings of a storm. The crowd parted as if moved by unseen hands, torches trembling in their grip. Elira. The silver glint of her badge caught the firelight like a blade. It bore the council's seal, but she didn't ride like one of them. She rode like a warning. She pulled back the reins and dismounted in a single motion, boots splashing in muck. Her hand rested casually near her holster, but she didn't draw. She didn't need to. Her presence alone bent the air. Rhys didn't move. Not yet. The last time he saw her, they'd been on opposite sides of a canyon, both shouting orders into chaos. She had fire in her, then commanded men like an avalanche. And now, here she was again, eyes the same hard blue, posture stiff from old grudges and fresh doubts. "Elira," he said, almost too quiet to be heard. "Marshal," she returned, the title heavy with irony. The crowd murmured, unsure. Her badge said one thing, her stance said another. "Your counsel," someone challenged. Elira's eyes flicked to the speaker. "I was." A man stepped forward, torch lifted. "Then act like it, burn the witch." Elira turned to him slow, unhurried, like a predator sizing prey. "You speak for the council now?" The man's mouth opened, then closed. The torch dropped an inch. "I came ahead of them," she said to all. "They're not far behind. They won't knock like I did." That silenced the rest. Elira turned back to Rhys, voice quieter. "They know she's here. And they don't want a trial. They want a message." "How long?" Rhys asked. "Till dawn." He nodded once. Rain streamed from his hair, dripping down the collar of his shirt. Behind him, Mira stepped closer, eyes locked on Elira, face unreadable. "You here to help them?" Rhys asked. Elira's jaw tensed, her hand flexed at her side. "I'm here to give you time, that's all I can buy." Rhys let out a breath through his nose. "Better than I expected." She took a step closer, dropped her voice. "You were right about Hollow Rock. Rot starts quiet, under the floorboards. You don't see it until the whole house is ash." He looked at her for a long moment. "You going to stay?" "No," she said. "If I stay, they burn me too. But I'll ride the long way back, delay them." Behind them, the townsfolk still stood, uncertain. Their hunger for blood, momentarily stalled. But it was only a pause, not a change of heart. Elira turned back toward her horse, pausing just once more. "Make peace. Or make a stand. Just don't wait for mercy." Then she was gone, swallowed by the dark, her hoofbeats fading like a last chance vanishing into storm. Rhys stared out at the town, Mira at his side. Neither spoke, because now they knew dawn was no longer a beginning. It was the end coming on horseback. The fire was out, but the smoke still lingered, clinging to the rafters, to breath, to memory. Inside the barn, the air was thick with it. Outside, the storm had moved on, leaving only a cold wind and the distant creak of soaked wood drying in the early light. Rhys stood over the table in silence, fingers tracing the edges of a scorched scrap of cloth. The emblem sewn into its center was still visible, the council's seal, half melted, blackened at the rim. Mira sat near the doorway, face pale, hands resting in her lap. Her eyes were dry now, not from peace, but from running out of tears. When she finally spoke, her voice didn't shake. "I was a midwife. 12 years in the western lowlands. They trained me in New Lark, certified, sworn." Rhys didn't look up. He'd heard it the night before, in pieces. But the full weight of it landed now, with dawn creeping over the windowsill like truth crawling into the light. The child came early, she continued. Breach, no help nearby. The father native-born begged me, so I did what I was trained to do. She paused. The silence that followed felt like standing on a precipice. The mother died, the child lived. That's when the whispers started, Rhys said. Mira nodded. Council never said it outright, but I saw how they looked at me. Corrupted by blood, they said. Said I'd protected a split blood, that it endangered the sanctity of birthright. So they branded me with heresy. She reached into the folds of her skirt and produced something small, round, dulled bronze. She held it between two fingers. I stole this from the judge's house, after the fire. She passed it to Rhys, who turned it over in his hand. A medallion council issue, but what struck him wasn't the symbol. It was the back. A smear of melted wax, a stamp pressed hastily into it, with a single word, forgive. Rhys's breath slowed. He was hiding something. His son was the father, Mira said. The boy set the fire. Not to kill his father, though maybe part of him wanted that, but to destroy the birth record. To bury what he'd done. Illyra entered then, muddy from her detour, coat slung over one shoulder. She walked straight to the table and stared at the medallion. I saw the scorch mark, Rhys said. Burned into the floor beneath the judge's desk. The same pattern. Illyra turned, eyes sweeping the crowd that had formed just outside. Word had spread that something was happening. That something might be ending. She stepped through the barn door like a blade drawn slowly. You think she cursed him? She said loud enough for all to hear. You think justice looks like fear wrapped in fire? No one answered. She saved a child. They tried to silence her for it. She held up the medallion. Is this your justice? The silence that followed was different than the one before. Heavier, shamed. Even the wind paused to listen. An old woman near the front of the crowd removed her shawl, walked forward, and draped it over Mira's shoulders. Then, one by one, others followed. Not many, but enough. No torches, no accusations, just breath and space, and the slow realization that a lie had been allowed to bloom too long in their soil. Rhys stood beside Mira, Illyra beside him. And Hollow Rock, for the first time in days, held its breath without anger. The morning came gray and slow, dragging light across the broken edges of Hollow Rock like a bandage over a bruise. Smoke curled gently from the remnants of old torches, now black stubs embedded in the dirt, forgotten weapons from a battle that never reached its crescendo. Ashes from the night's tension still clung to rooftops and boots. And yet, there was no fire, no march of hooves, no orders barked in council dialect. Just rain steady, late, but finally here, sifting down over the town like forgiveness, whispered too late for ceremony, but just in time to matter. No one spoke much that morning. There were no announcements, no verdicts, just a quiet understanding passed between glances and closed doors that, for once, began to open on their own. The bounty posters, once crisp and nailed proud to the tavern walls, sagged now, soaked and tearing at the corners. The council seal bled red into the wood, turning the word heretic into nothing but blurred lines. Rain had blurred more than paper. It had softened something in the way people walked, in the way they looked at each other, especially at her. Mira stepped out into the street with her chin high and her face uncovered. The scar on her cheek, once the mark of exile, now shimmered faintly in the light rain, no longer hidden, no longer shamed. Her steps were slow but sure, and not a soul moved to stop her. Her dress was clean, plain, dry, only for a moment before the rain kissed it darker. Behind her, Sammy followed closely, one hand gripping the edge of her sleeve. The carved wooden bird he'd been gifted hung around his neck by a bit of twine. It bounced with each step, a small totem of defiance, or maybe survival. They gathered at the old well, just a handful. Townsfolk who had watched from windows, who had once tightened their mouths at the sight of her. Now, they stood in a loose circle, unsure of what this moment meant, only that it mattered. Mira didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The rain made everything else still. "Sometimes," she said, looking not at them but at the sky beyond them, "ruin isn't the end. It's the thing that burns away what never should have stood." A murmur of breath moved through the crowd. "You called me cursed," she continued, eyes now sweeping gently across the faces. "But I wasn't the one who forgot how to protect the innocent. I just wouldn't forget what it meant." Sammy reached up and took her hand. "I'm not here to stay," she said. "But I won't run either. Not anymore." From the hill above town, Reese watched in silence. His coat was buttoned high against the chill, his stance unreadable beneath the wide brim of his hat. He didn't come down. He didn't need to. This wasn't his moment. The barn still stood behind him, scarred but whole. The door creaked slightly in the wind, and the spiral carved into the beam caught a thread of light. Elira's trail had gone cold by dawn. Whether the council ever meant to come, no one could say. Maybe they'd found another fire to stoke, or maybe they'd seen enough to know the spark had failed here. Down in the town, Mira turned one last time to look up at the hill. She didn't wave, she just nodded. And for the first time in Hollow Rock, ruin didn't feel like a sentence, it felt like a beginning. The wind had changed again. It came now from the south, hot and dust-laced despite the morning's rain. And it carried a sound Reese hadn't heard in days, not storm or fire, but something quieter, heavier, hoofbeats, slow, purposeful, distant, but getting clearer. He stood on the rise above Hollow Rock, overlooking the valley where the town's blood once spilled invisible into its soil, where fear had taken root in silence and been pulled up, finally, by its jagged edges. Below him, Hollow Rock stirred quiet, cautious, but alive. Smoke no longer rose from torches. The barn stood, scarred but not blackened. Windows were open, doors too. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer clanged, someone repairing what was once boarded shut. Mira was gone, heading west with Sammy and a few others who'd chosen to follow her instead of tradition. They hadn't said goodbye, they hadn't needed to. Reese stood alone. The medallion Elira had left behind rested in his coat pocket, its edges smoothed by fire and resolve. She hadn't returned. Maybe she wouldn't. She'd made her stand in her way, bought them time. Bought him a choice. He hadn't spoken it out loud, but he knew now he wasn't leaving. He tightened the last buckle on his coat, leather creaking like old bones. His boots were heavy in the mud, but he didn't shift his weight. His revolver sat holstered at his side, not drawn, not twitching. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement. Beyond the ridge, the figures emerged, small at first, like dots against the sky, but growing, shaped by dust and distance, into riders. Half a dozen. No banners flying, but the gait of their mounts and the formation said enough. Councilmen, enforcers. The kind who didn't knock, who didn't speak unless it was to deliver a verdict. No trial. No smoke signals, just the slow, certain advance of power in uniform. Reese didn't move. He watched them descend the first hill, not rushing, not hiding. This wasn't a raid, it was an arrival. They thought the work had already been done, that fear had paved their path, that ruin had taken root, that Reese Delane would hand over what remained of his dignity in exchange for mercy. He straightened his collar, rain wrinkled and dusty. His hand brushed the small wooden bird still tied to his belt loop by Sammy. A reminder, not of what he had lost, but of what he had decided to protect. And then, clear and low, his voice cut the silence. "Then let them come." It wasn't defiance. It was faith. Because standing on that ridge, Reese wasn't waiting to fight. He was waiting to be seen. For once, not as the man he had been trained to be, but as the man he had chosen to become. The camera pulls back slowly, widening the frame, showing the vastness of the land, the broken lines of the town behind him, the storm-lit faces of the riders ahead. Between them, one man, coat flapping in the wind, eyes steady. And you? What would you stand for when everything you are is already in ruins?